You may not remember every insult, but your body remembers what it was like to be targeted and left alone with it. The tightening in your chest, the urge to disappear, the anger you learned to swallow because showing it would only make things worse. What happens to a child when cruelty is repeated and no one steps in is not just emotional pain. It is a quiet rewiring of how safety, worth, and self-control are learned. Many people grow up believing they are anxious, overly sensitive, or too hard on themselves. But long before that, they were a child who had to survive something that never should have been theirs to carry. A childhood marked by emotional absence. The anger doesn't begin with shouting or violence. It begins with coldness that lasts so long it stops feeling like something is missing and starts feeling like something is wrong with you. When caregivers are physically present but emotionally unreachable, a quiet rage takes shape with nowhere to go. You're not allowed to be angry at them because nothing bad is happening. There are no bruises, no clear blame, so the anger turns inward. The child learns to swallow it and translate it into self-doubt. Maybe I'm not interesting enough, not easy enough, not worth the effort. Somewhere deep inside, a vow forms, not hopeful but resigned. If I try harder, if I shrink enough, this feeling might stop. But it doesn't. It hardens, and it follows you into the world as a dull, constant irritation you never learned to name. Learning to please as a survival strategy. Learning to please doesn't come from kindness alone. It comes from fear mixed with resentment you're not allowed to express. You smile when you're uncomfortable. You apologize when you feel wronged. You agree because disagreement feels dangerous. On the surface, it looks like cooperation. Underneath, it's containment, a way to keep the anger from leaking out. As a child, this strategy worked. It reduced tension. It kept you included. It made adults less distant. But every time you silenced your frustration to maintain peace, it reinforced a quiet belief. Your discomfort matters less than other people's comfort. Over time, the anger doesn't disappear. It settles into the body as fatigue, as numbness, as a low-grade self-contempt for needing anything at all. When kindness becomes a target, eventually, the world notices what you've learned to hide. In classrooms and social spaces, some people sense it immediately. The hesitation, the softness, the reluctance to push back. What you meant as kindness is read as permission. Teasing escalates. Boundaries are tested. Exclusion becomes routine. And the most painful part is not just the bullying, but the confusion. You did everything you were taught to do. You were polite, accommodating, non-threatening, and still, you became a target. The anger that should have gone outward turns inward instead. You don't think, they're cruel. You think, I must be weak. And the harder you try to be agreeable, the more resentment builds, buried beneath the belief that you somehow deserve what's happening. Internalizing rejection and self-blame. When rejection repeats without explanation, the mind fills in the blanks. If a parent didn't respond, if peers didn't choose you, the simplest conclusion becomes the most painful one. There must be something fundamentally wrong with me. Anger at being overlooked morphs into disgust at yourself for wanting attention in the first place. You become both the performer and the critic. Life feels like a stage where you're constantly adjusting, scanning faces for approval, rewriting yourself in real time. Any failure feels personal. Any rejection feels confirming. The rage you never expressed now fuels a harsh inner voice, one that punishes you preemptively so others won't have to. From bullied child to anxious adult, growing up doesn't erase these patterns. It disguises them. The anxious adult still carries the bullied child's anger, but it shows up as hypervigilance, as overwork, as the constant urge to prove worth. You repeat familiar dynamics in jobs, friendships, and relationships, drawn to situations where you must earn your place. Being chosen feels like relief. Being overlooked feels unbearable. You tell yourself you're striving for excellence, but underneath, perfection is a cage built from fear and resentment. It keeps you productive, compliant, and quietly furious with yourself for never feeling satisfied. Living behind the mask of approval. By now, the mask feels permanent. You read other people's emotions instantly. You sense shifts in tone, pauses in conversation, changes in energy. Silence feels threatening. Delayed responses feel personal. Your nervous system stays alert, ready to adjust, ready to compensate. This isn't sensitivity for its own sake. It's learned survival. You give endlessly, listen deeply, anticipate needs before they're spoken, and still feel empty. The anger you once felt toward others has been fully internalized. It becomes a belief that no matter how much you give, you'll never quite deserve rest, care, or ease. The turning point: reclaiming the self. At some point, often quietly, something starts to crack. Not in a dramatic way, but in a tired one. A question surfaces that once felt forbidden. What do I actually want? At first, there's nothing but irritation and guilt. Wanting feels selfish. Saying no feels dangerous. But slowly, you notice moments where compliance costs more than refusal. The anger you once turned against yourself begins to point outward, not as blame, but as information. A signal that something matters, that you matter. This isn't healing as performance. It's resistance against a lifetime of self-erasure, a quiet victory over the past. The anger doesn't vanish. It doesn't need to. It changes shape. What was once toxic self-hatred becomes discernment. Boundaries form not from confidence, but from exhaustion with self-betrayal. You begin to recognize that empathy doesn't require self-abandonment, and that love doesn't demand constant proof. The child who learned to survive through silence is finally met by an adult willing to listen without judgment. And in that meeting, something settles. Not triumph, not closure, just a quiet, hard-earned peace that no longer needs you to disappear. What stays after all of this is not a conclusion, but a softer recognition that what you lived through did not end when the bullying stopped. It carried forward in quiet ways, in how your body learned to brace, in how your mind learned to watch, in how your emotions learned to stay contained, just in case. But there is an important distinction that often gets lost. You are not the wound. You are not the reactions that formed around it. Those patterns were learned in a moment when you were small and needed protection. They were not choices. They were responses, intelligent ones. They belong to what happened to you, not to who you are. None of this erases the pain. It doesn't make it smaller or easier. What it does is place it where it belongs, outside of your identity. Understanding does not rewrite the past, but it does loosen the future. When something is seen clearly, it no longer has to run silently in the background. Awareness does not demand change. It simply opens space. There is no rush here, no requirement to become different, no timeline you need to meet. Whatever comes next is allowed to move at the pace your system can trust. Even stillness counts. Even pause counts. You may remember the child from the beginning of this story, the one who learned to stay quiet, to endure, to survive. You can look at them differently now, not as someone who failed to fight back, but as someone who made it through. And that truth deserves to be held with care.